You are here today with us to talk about planning for a full life, really looking at the birth to gray with inclusivity and belonging in mind. I am Stephanie Coleman. I'm a coordinator at the Sacramento
County Office of Education.
Thank you. And my background, I'm an ed specialist by trade. I spent 17 years in the classroom supporting students with disabilities, and it's where my heart work is, and so I'm grateful for the opportunity I have to continue and expand that work in some county and statewide projects. And my favorite person to present with, and wonderful executive director.
Good afternoon. I'm Kristin Wright, and I also work at the Sacramento County Office of Education. And although I am a county administrator, I am first and foremost the mom of a 27-year-old daughter with intellectual disabilities. And so this topic is very near and dear to my heart because I'm living it every day, 24 hours a day. And so you'll hear a little bit more about that in a minute. But I also come through the lens of an ed specialist, as well as the former state director of special education. So traversed compliance around the IDEA and special education, and what I love more, which is thinking about and developing systems to make sure that we have inclusion and belonging in mind as we're trying to recreate and reinvent education. And so one of the reasons that Stephanie and I decided to do this particular presentation is because, particularly as Shelby gets older, I reflect back on the things that I wish I would have done differently and the system would have done differently. So as we're all working and pushing towards changes and a better system, it really applies to every age and stage. And obviously we have to start really early, but we can't forget to continue to try to make improvements all the way up to our oldest citizens in society.
So we're going to talk a little bit about some accessibility features really briefly. You can see we have captioning running. That's a big part of accessibility and ensuring that everyone has access. It's not just about hearing, it's about being able to process information and be able to truly lean into the understanding that we all have variability. We also are going to make sure that as we're asking questions, I'm going to come around with a microphone and really try not to get feedback from the speakers, but we're going to ask you to use the microphone so everyone can have equal access to being able to hear the information that's being shared. We have lots of visual supports built in today, and we really tried to build on multimodal instruction, culturally responsive pedagogy, and we universally designed this to meet the needs of a diverse audience. And we also really focus on social emotional core competencies because, again, we are humans and we have lots of needs, and so we want to make sure that we're meeting our basic needs as we're learning and expanding our understanding on things.
And I'll add that one of the reasons that Stephanie is explaining all this to you is that one of our missions at SCOE and in all the presenting we do across the state is to try to model belonging in presenting. And so it's actually been catching on. We're pretty excited about that. Our county office has started to put in place an expectation that these type of accessibility features appear. So whenever we might need them as people, they're available and we don't always have to ask for everything.
All right, so this slide is pretty small, so I'm going to lean in a little bit so I can make sure that I'm reading it. You've seen these in every session, which is another universal support that I love about this particular conference. We have diverse views, and it's really important that today, as we have opportunities to share, that we ask if you're comfortable sharing, that you do. You take that opportunity to use your unique perspective and help expand other people's. We're going to share from ours. We know that we have our own personal experience from the things that have happened, and we also know that you do as well. And your experiences help us grow in our understanding of things. Our work is really impacted by a lot of different things, but we spend a lot of time talking to people. We spend a lot of time surveying people, and we do our best to make sure that we are invested in hearing from the community that we serve. And so as much of our work that we do can be directly impacted by those who are being served by that work is a mission that we have. And so this work today and hearing the stories that people will share also continues to inform that work. You want to add anything? Partnerships. Sorry, there's 4 things on this slide. Partnerships. We are partnered with lots of different people within the statewide system of support. That's you've heard from lots of people today that also partner with the statewide system of support, but we also partner in the disability community. And I will say we're very lucky that Kristin has all of the very many connections that she has. Every time we turn around, she's telling me, we're going to talk to so-and-so from this organization. I'm like, everybody. She really does. So we really leverage those partnerships to make sure that the voice of the community is being heard. And then language, we always default to person first language. And we know that identity is an important part of feelings of belonging. But we also know that in an absence of knowing what someone's identity is, we should always identify first as a person, right? And so you'll hear us identify that way as we talk. And then we use very specific language that we're going to see today about inclusion, rightful presence, and belonging. And you'll see those on some of our slides that have been called out as well. We're big on language. Actually, language is another one of our big areas of belonging. The language that we use has the power to create places and spaces of belonging or create a lot of othering. And so the language that we choose to use and we talk about a lot is language that eliminates the idea of othering students, especially as we're centering students in our work. We will always try and make sure that any acronyms that we're going to use, we actually just try not to use them in presentations with families. But if we do, please call it out if we've missed explaining what something is. We know that our identity and intersectionality are absolutely critical. And the thing about disability is it's the one identity that truly intersects every other identity. And that in a lifetime, it's one of the identities that we can pretty much be guaranteed at some point, either for a time or for the rest of our lives, we will be part of that particular community. And so with that, we pay attention and really lean into that intersectionality. The resources. So we started this, the very first page on the table and the very first slide is a QR code. It's also uploaded in the Padlet, so you have access there. This home-based document will link you to everything we talk about today, and you also have access to the live version of the slides, which is important because any picture of anything is hyperlinked. So if you were to click on that, like if you were opening in the slides and you clicked on that picture, it would take you to that document. So know that everything is available to you. We don't talk about anything that we don't then provide to you, so you have easy access to it.
So today we really want to have a conversation. We don't want to talk at you the entire time. We really want you to engage with us. And today we're going to discuss how creating each educational journey, and as we know, through person-centered planning and with the goal of self-determination and self-agency, that we really are focused on having belonging in mind as a critical component to ensuring that there's choice and opportunity for everyone. And we know that this doesn't happen magically, that this takes a lot of intentionality and planning. Secondly, we're going to discover how designing for variability and disability at home, school, and in the community can really empower families and professionals to co-create together. And as we know from the best IEP team meetings or IPP meetings we can imagine, having lots of representation from lots of different perspectives really lends to high quality plans for folks. So we're going to really start focusing, starting with school, and then we'll start talking a little bit more about after. But first we want to just talk a little bit about why Birth to Gray. And as Stephanie and I have been talking, and we live and breathe this every day of thinking about what is it that we need to do in the K-12 system and even before that to make sure that we give everyone the most opportunity they can have. And how do we help co-create and push our communities to have places of belonging so that we're not supplanting and we're not trying to create these fake places that everyone has to go, right? We want everyone to belong. So as I was thinking about this with Shelby, and Shelby again is my 27-year-old daughter who grew up down the street here in River Park, actually, in Sacramento. When Shelby turned 3, Shelby was born with her disabilities. When Shelby turned 3, we were getting ready to go into the school system. And for those of you who know me and our story, we were offered a class over at David Lubin for individuals with autism. Now, Shelby doesn't have autism, but because they weren't really sure what to do with Shelby, we were offered a lot of different kinds of separate settings. At that same school was a beautiful inclusive preschool. But that was, at the time, because as moms, you sometimes don't know, that was the opportunity we were given, was that separate setting. And so it didn't take long for Shelby to let us know that that wasn't her ideal setting. And so for the next number of years, 9 years, Shelby was homeschooled in River Park in our garage that we converted to basically a little school and therapy unit. She also was educated alone. Her grandmother's here, who is a preschool teacher, and there she is. And she graciously spent days with Shelby working with her as her preschool teacher and helping to provide support as the linkage between her and the school system. We had home teaching and therapies and all the things that you know about come over to the house. The one thing that we were missing, and that we were actually missing as a family too, was that sense of belonging that you get not only for your child to go to school, but also as a parent of a child that's in school. And so even though we were an active part of our River Park community, and it's kind of ironic, right, that we're here, I'm presenting here today, and people were very nice, we had a lone lived experience. And because of that, most of the community, most of the people her age in River Park don't really know her. And so as she started to get older, and as you hear so often, Shelby started having behaviors. What did that look like? That looked like whacking her therapist over the head with her drumstick, or doing any other types of things to try to communicate that she really didn't want to be in that garage anymore. She really wanted to be out with people. And for any of us who have been with the same people every day, all day for our entire life, I mean, they're nice people, but it gets kind of boring, right? And so it wasn't really until that happened that it caused me to really step back. Because of course, as a mom, you think, wow, I'm giving her everything she needs. She has every therapy known to mankind. This is so great. And I didn't understand that belonging piece until much later, and I reflected back and thinking, well, that wasn't a very good idea. But we know what we know, right? And we know what our school systems tell us. So that's one reason we're on this mission, to not have school systems tell parents that keeping kids in little tiny environments, separate and safe, is necessarily what we want for later on in life, right? So the picture you see, long story short, 5th grade, behaviors comes over. We're like, what's wrong with Shelby? The doctor suggests medication. There's some other suggestions. The behavior says, I think Shelby wants to get out of the garage. Wow. Mind blown, right? And so Shelby did. Shelby got out of the garage. Shelby entered an Aspire school, had just opened on El Camino. It was a K-12 school, public school. And they said, we've never had a Shelby before. We've never had anyone with extensive support needs before. But we're pretty sure we need to serve the full population of students because that's actually the law. And so they took her on with vigor, and Shelby stayed there until she graduated at 22. Now, had she graduated last year or the year before, Shelby would have graduated with a high school diploma. Now, if Shelby graduated this year or last year, she would have graduated with a high school diploma. She did not prior. She graduated with a certificate of completion because up until 22-23 school year, students with extensive support needs were not eligible for a diploma if they didn't take the full rigor of all the courses in high school. And we'll talk a little bit about that change later because I think it's important for everyone to know and be able to talk to folks about the opportunities that literally everyone in California can get a high school diploma now, which is pretty epic. So reflecting on Shelby's picture in that photo right there, that's the Torch Club. How many people have been to the Torch Club? Yes. The Torch Club is that old bar across the street from Memorial Auditorium. And it's been there forever. And the Torch Club is probably what I would describe as the most welcoming environment in Sacramento. And so Shelby goes there every Thursday and Sunday night. And she has a posse. And I can always tell who she was hanging out with by the smell of their perfume on her clothes when she gets home. So had I backward mapped from the Torch Club, and had I backward mapped from thinking about the possibility of inclusive college for Shelby, I would have in my mind had a little different idea about maybe some of the things that I should have been a little bit more demanding of. And the number one is communication. Functional communication beyond 12 pet cards. Because how do you know what someone knows, and how do you provide the context for critical thinking if you don't have language to be able to show it? I haven't yet, I'm planning on it, I haven't yet figured out how to telepathically talk to her. And I can't wait. And in the pool a few weeks ago, we had a young man with autism come up, and he told me that he wanted to let me know that Shelby had a lot to say, and that if he had a superpower, he would have created a watch that would be able to speak directly and connect directly with Shelby's brain. And so I hope that he does invent that, because that would be really helpful. So Shelby is nonverbal or non-speaking. We like to say non-speaking. She's very verbal. She has a lot to say, but the way that her vocal cords and facial muscles are formed, she's not able to speak. So she uses a communication device, touch chat. And so she went from her 12 pet cards to 7 layers of 30 icons, which, if you can imagine, is a lot more language than just being able to say yes, no, and I don't like that, right? And so while we're still working on that, I wish that we would have really been, that would have been like our major full focus, starting so much earlier beyond what we did in the first place. So what we're mapping to now for Shelby, and this is why we started talking about this presentation, was because at first I was just mapping to like each day. I just wanted her to not cry. I just wanted to have her be okay in school for a whole day and not get called. And we hear from many parents, and that's what they're mapping to. But what happens when we map to that then is those days turn into weeks, turn into months, and then we haven't planned. And so the idea is now that we have a high school diploma for everyone, that we have inclusive college for students with intellectual and developmental disabilities that we haven't had before. Those types of things to backward map to then look forward about how we're going to create belonging, allows us so much more opportunity to think bigger. And so as I'm thinking about, and we're thinking as a team and a family with Shelby about her person-centered plan, she's in self-determination. She's making a lot of choices about who she wants to hire and what she wants to do with her life. And a lot of the things that I wanted her to do, she doesn't want to do. And so we're having to really rethink that. So we're curious from you all, from where you're sitting, what does having a full life mean to you? Is it being independent? Is it going to the Torch Club and having community? what does that look like? Because I think one of the things that we want to hear from you, and I'm looking at our consumers, our individuals with disabilities, and I know Peter has something to say. We're curious what that means for you so that we can make sure that we are sharing the voices of people with disabilities and not what we think people with disabilities want, because that's what I did for so long, right? Peter, did you want to just start us off over here?
I think to have a full life and a good life, you really have to be able to make your own choice. And you have to sort of set the trajectory of your life, and families and professionals and everybody else really needs to listen. It doesn't mean that you don't need supports to get there, but really, as much as a person's able, they should be able to drive the train. And keep in mind that part of having a full life is having things go wrong and sometimes failing. You know, the Lanterman Act says that people with developmental disabilities, like myself and others with disabilities, have the right to have service and support. So basically, they can live lives just like those without disability. It doesn't mean that doesn't say they have to be all good experiences, but you have to go through life doing what you want to do.
Thank you.
Now, I'll wrap it up in just a second. But negative experiences make you stronger too. I have a brother who has autism. My parents taught me over the years how to support him. I got married, was married for 14 years, got a divorce. Didn't really enjoy that one, but that's part of life. It happens to everybody. My mom passed away from cancer. I had to navigate, support her through her end of life.
Yep.
I've had, I recently was hospitalized in a medically induced coma, and I had to sort of fight my way back. So, but even though there's bumps in the road, you can still have a good life. And what I want to tell parents and professionals is you really have to empower folks to have to do that. Be there when they need you, but let them experience life, because someday supporters may not be around as much, or you might not be around, and we still have to get through life.
I think we're going to have to get some quotes from Peter and put him in our presentation. Amen.
Thank you, Peter.
How many of you have heard the term dignity of risk? That's exactly what Peter's talking about, dignity of risk, allowing people, any of us, the opportunity to fail and struggle so that we can be people and learn and get stronger. And I think for a long time, our natural instinct as parents is to protect our kids. I thought I was protecting Shelby by keeping her home with a world that somehow I thought wasn't ready for her, because that's kind of what I had been told. So, Peter, thank you for that. We didn't plan that, but that was spot on. Thank you. Anyone else want to share?
I just want to add that I think that another sort of a component of that self-determination that we sometimes don't think about is demonstrating the choices that are available, because it's really easy to say, oh yes, you have self-determination, but if you haven't been shown all of the things you could determine, then it really cuts down on your potential. So I think that's another big piece.
Yeah, and how many have experienced that? I know we have. You're supposed to decide what you want, but no one can give you a list, right? That hidden list. What's been really great, I don't know how many of you are tuned into Disability Voices United, DVM. If you're not, I highly recommend that you look at the work that they're doing, particularly in federal advocacy for people with disabilities, but also every week they get on there and they break it down for people about what are all those things out there that no one knows about. And actually, a week ago, they had GDS on there answering questions and breaking up myths about things people thought about self-determination. There's some really powerful Facebook pages and groups, and Disability Voices United is one of them.
So now we're going to talk about this nuance between inclusion and belonging. And I think for a long time, we can agree that we have been pushing really hard for inclusion for people with disabilities over and over and over again. I know I have. And what we know is that there is a difference between inclusion and real meaningful belonging. You can be in a space and be included and not feel like you belong at all. Has that been true for anyone? Anyone ever been somewhere and you were included, but you did not feel like you belonged? We can all feel that, right? So there's a big difference between those two things. And while we still want to ensure that students have access in school to all of the same areas and activities and opportunities as all peers, like everyone has an equal opportunity for all those things, we also need to attend to belonging. Because a lack of attending to that belonging, we're going to have a lot of people feeling like they're in places and spaces and there's not going to be those basic needs met. So the intent of having them be in there isn't really going to be of value. So let's take a look at a couple of things. I love this video. Hopefully it's going to play loud
I am
enough.
still reflecting on this morning's lecture and conversation with Dr. John Powell. The thing that's really standing out to me is the way he described the difference between belonging and inclusion. And he used a great example. He said that inclusion is like throwing a party. And as the host, you can pick the time, the date, the location, the food, the playlist, right? All the details are up to you. And then you just invite people in a welcoming way to be a part of the thing that you created. Whereas belonging is different because belonging is like being a co-host. It's about co-creation. It's about being in community and knowing that not one person is responsible for all of the fine details and that you get to work together in deciding how you want the party to look for the whole collective. And so my question for you is, how do you start to create more spaces that foster a sense of belonging rather than just including people into the thing that you created?
So you've probably seen a lot of iterations of this, I don't know what you'd call it, visual. And we've used this a lot over the years around inclusion. And for many, many years, until not so long ago, it didn't include belonging. It included inclusion because one of the things that we measure in the state is how much time a person spends in an environment, right? And so the goal becomes having more people spend more time with all the other people in what we call general education, rather than what's starting to happen now, which is let's create all spaces with belonging in mind so that we can include the most students and people from the beginning. And let's also co-create through community schools and other initiatives the spaces that our youth want, our youth with and without disabilities, because those spaces are very different from the spaces that we all had, many of us, when we were in school. So this idea of belonging is not just the inclusion slide, which is every kind of person's together in a room, but rather it's concentric circles and co-creation, and it's fluid because it's constantly changing. And if you look at how our credentialing system is starting to shift, it's really starting to shift more towards trying to understand neurodiversity and learner variability so that we're creating lessons and spaces for more people to feel included. Doesn't mean that people with disabilities don't need supports. That is absolutely not what I'm saying. But what we're saying is that let's raise the bar so that we're not having to recreate everything. And as special educators, as specialists, we know that we spend a lot of time taking lesson plans and trying to make someone fit in them. It's exactly the same analogy as making a party. The teacher makes a party, and then the ed specialist comes in and is like trying to figure out that way that a student can be included. It's a little beautiful right now with some of the work that they're doing around AI to be able to take a lesson and then take all the learner variability and choice in a classroom of students and be able to bring those two things together to help general ed teachers really be able to create lessons and settings that accommodate all students.
All right, so some of the things that we think about when we're talking about belonging, we're thinking about inclusion as in we have to be around to be long, right? Like we actually have to be there in those places and spaces. There has to be a level of connection. We have to be recognized, and we have to have agency or choice or self-determination. To have all of those components really need to be present. It's really the essence of what makes up the places and spaces of belonging. When we look at things like the TIE Center, and you actually have access to these kind of a more diverse, the full content from the TIE Center on belonging, we know that there are 10 dimensions that make up belonging, and present is just the beginning. To be in a space is just the beginning. We have to attend to all of the components of belonging for someone to feel like the place and space that they're in was designed for them, that they're known, they're needed, they're seen, they're felt, they're supported. All of those components are really critical, and we want those to be happening not just in schools, but if we start in schools, or we have the opportunity to make those things happen in schools, then we can be pushing as people have been supported and included and feel a sense of belonging in school. Then their peers who would know they were missing when they move into a more fuller life outside in the community will also be able to be allies in ensuring that those places and spaces outside of school are also places of belonging.
How many of you have ever heard of Eric Carter's work around belonging? Eric Carter is who created this wheel and did a lot of research. One of the things that I love about this and that we started using in my daughter's own IEP and IPP is if you look at these dimensions of belonging, they're really powerful to look at those and then ask questions across each one. Are all these things being met? To find that true sense of belonging. So it works really well with self-determination and planning for self-determination because all of these need to be met in order to really feel that true sense of belonging. So let's talk a little bit about creating communities of belonging across a lifetime. And we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about school because that is really, as we know, setting the on-ramp, not only for our individuals with disabilities and our students with disabilities and their families, but for all the people that are around our students with disabilities and our families, our community members, right? And so we're sending them a lot of not so subtle messages with the school settings that we currently have. And so one of those is that there's groups of students who don't belong. They need to be over there, and we don't know them, and we don't see them, and sometimes they have labels on their classroom, like an ED classroom or something like that. And so now we've created this scenario of othering, right? And so we've really started to think about how we intentionally reflect on, yes, we want to meet the tenets of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, but how do we balance that with this idea of we are people who need belonging in order for us to have a full life? And so one of the reflections we wanted to make before we kick into a little bit about school is just a reminder about where we came from. And this is just a short video that one of our friends at SPED Strategies made because she realized that a lot of people didn't really know where special education came from and why students with disabilities have rights. And it is really helpful.
As educators, we know that we don't succeed unless every student succeeds. In 2015, the Every Student Succeeds Act gave us a new lens on an important reality. Data made it clear that even the best schools are struggling to serve some student populations, especially students with disabilities, in the ways we know they deserve. Why are students with disabilities struggling while their classmates thrive? To understand how we got here, we need to turn back the pages of our history books. While compulsory education laws were passed in all states by 1918, laws in the 1950s and 60s specifically excluded students with disabilities from school. It wasn't until the 1970s that districts were required to provide a free and appropriate public education for students with disabilities. In 1975, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA, was signed into law. After the passing of this act, schools began opening their doors to students with disabilities. At that time, the focus was on ensuring students with more severe or easy to observe disabilities, such as physical limitations, were able to attend school. Despite this progress, students with disabilities often experienced an education that was segregated from their peers. More recently, students with disabilities were integrated more broadly across school campuses and sometimes classrooms with their peers of the same age, but were provided instruction and materials that lowered the overall expectations for them. This parallel experience created by integration occurred as we evolved our understanding of what it means to be a student with a disability, to include students with more mild, invisible disabilities, such as learning differences or speech impairments. Despite bringing students into our buildings and classrooms, performance gaps highlight that students with disabilities are not yet fully included in the learning experiences that our schools offer. We have more work to do. So, what is the path forward? If we want every child to succeed, we have to stop seeing the performance gaps of our students with disabilities as a special education problem and realize that the solution lies with all of us. We must face the reality that our education system was not originally established to support all students. And so rather than asking students to conform to the environments adults create, we must instead create an environment that is responsive to the unique needs of all students. We don't need to fix students. We need to fix our systems of support for them so that every student can engage in grade-level learning and achieve high expectations. This will require shifts in the way we think, operate, collaborate, use resources, and the way we problem solve when challenges arise. Doing this is not more work, but it is different work. When we do it well and students with disabilities succeed, everyone benefits. It will take a village. SPED Strategies is leading the effort to tackle this challenge. Join us.
This is starting to happen in our state. We, as a state, have made a huge commitment, a $450 million commitment over the last few years, to creating what are called community schools. And community schools think about the whole child and about co-creating schools. One of the issues that we see across all systems, including community schools, is that we always want to make sure that we have the voices of parents and students with disabilities, right? And so one of the plights that's happening, both at community schools and beyond, is a huge state investment in inclusive preschool. Because the data told us that if you start off in an inclusive preschool setting, the odds are incredibly higher that you will end up in an inclusive setting later, because your parents will expect it, the community will expect it, and students are able to learn how communities of schooling work, right? And so there has been a pretty massive effort in the state around inclusive school. As you know, we now have transitional kindergarten, right? And we have a lot more preschool for 3-year-olds, so that everyone can get that start early. We still need all of us to demand that students are able to have inclusive opportunities starting in preschool. And that has really, for our districts that have launched those initiatives, they're seeing a lot of changes in the rates of inclusion and belonging for their students and families. So this is an Eric Carter quote. Early segregation does not merely predict later segregation, it almost ensures it. The trajectory we establish in school is quite likely to continue after graduation. We must establish a trajectory of full and meaningful participation. When it comes to transition preparation, location matters. At some of our districts, we started bringing preschool programs together with transition programs 18 to 22. And you know what happened? The things that you learn in preschool are mapped across the grade span and are the things that we're still learning as adults, all of us, right? And so with intentionality, the state is continuing to work on that. In centering the voices of the disability community, we try to make sure to always have quotes from the disability community. And this one is from Ethan, who said, "Do the people who design school systems stop to think about how big the disability community will grow to be? Anyone can become disabled at any time. Wouldn't it make sense to design systems that include authentic disability representation from our earliest years?" Kind of makes sense to me.
So as we're thinking about inclusion and starting early, I want to give a little bit of texture and context to this as an educator who worked in my last years in high school. And we were really trying hard to have more inclusive practices. And a lot of that looks like co-teaching. If you talk about inclusive practices in secondary, you're going to hear about co-teaching. That's like their besties. And the thing is there's it's a difficult conversation to have when students have primarily been taught by ed specialists in separate settings and just the math of it, right? If I'm teaching a class in a separate setting and I have 5 classes a day that I teach in a separate setting and I have 18 to 24 students in each of those classes, and then we want to shift to a co-teaching model where a third or less of the students in a classroom setting, that's the most appropriate proportion, that's less than the number of students that I was teaching, right? So proportionately, it becomes a challenge. And people are always like, well, what can we do? And I always go, well, if we started inclusive, they would have had a seat space in a classroom in every year that they went to school, and it would not be an extra ask. There would not be new sections needed in high school. And so when we backwards map, we're actually planning appropriately for that future that we and we want to have. And so I also think that that's an important conversation because there is sometimes it's uncomfortable. We're in an uncomfortable time as we shift from one thing that we've been doing for a long time to something new. Because in that interim, sometimes it requires some extra resources, people, thinking, willingness, all of those pieces, right? But when we start with the benefits in early childhood and we realize that they are the same benefits that we see all the way through transition, we're really going to see power. So when we think about early childhood and we look at what are some of the things, well, we have deep, meaningful relationships. And they get to continue in those deep, meaningful relationships throughout school, which then lead to deep, meaningful relationships in the future. I had a great conversation at lunch today, and the conversation really was about how difficult it was to have meaningful relationships in life after school and continue to have those relationships that lasted and were meaningful outside of the school setting. The more time spent having relationships, the more time we're going to benefit from them. And so when we are thinking, like, what does this look like? And tapping back to Eric Carter's belonging, dimensions of belonging. So what does that look like? Well, in Miss Opal's class, Miss Opal enjoys getting to know her students at a personal level. When she learned that Joseph loves dinosaurs, she worked with the ed specialist and other support staff to make sure that dinosaurs were incorporated into learning opportunities that enhanced Joseph's learning experience and levels of engagement. She knew him. She planned for him. Now he feels a sense of belonging because the curriculum matches his interest. It's not complicated. This is not a complicated idea. And then when we look at, what is that other word? I don't remember the light blue word. Is that supported? Supported.
Invited.
Is that one invited? Mm-hmm. Okay. Amira and her classmates are learning how to measure objects, which helps Amira master early number concepts, which is one of her goals. Her classmate Sarah says, let's count together to see how long it is. Sarah counts out loud as Amira touches each number in sequence on her communication device. She was invited. She got to feel a sense of belonging and community with this peer in the classroom setting. We can design for that. It's not complicated. It's not hard. We have to design for which kids work with which kids. So we have personalities in classrooms. Teachers do that all the time. We can do the same thing to plan for students. So as we move into looking at school years and education as a launch pad for what belonging looks like lifelong, we have a few things that we really need to consider. And again, centering on disability voice, we really love Gordy, mostly because he's sassy and he sasses like I do. So I'm going to read this quote really quickly. Imagine spending every day from age 5 to 21 looking at clocks, coins, and colors. Are you bored enough to riot? Are you defeated enough to unravel your shorts and eat them? I've been there and it sucks. If I could change just one thing about education before I die, it would be the idea that non-speaking people can't handle real academics. Do better. And I love this because in supporting students with disabilities, oftentimes behavior is the way they have to earn their way into a classroom setting. When their behavior is often their number one communication tool to tell us, just like Shelby was telling you, that she was not interested in being there anymore. That was not the place that they want to be. And yet we use that as a measure to prevent students from having high access to academics. As we think about planning for students to have rigor and actually thinking clocks, colors, and what was the other one? Coins are not appropriate to keep teaching every single year, year after year after year, because why do we even do that? Like, I don't even know why we do that, and yet we see it all the time, right? We have to think about being able to provide students with access to high thinking ideas, right? Concepts. We don't call them standards for any other reason than that there's a belief that they should be something standard for everybody to have access to thinking and learning and knowing about. And so we can use tools like the high quality IEP team have created to help us think about what are the strengths that students have and how do we use those strengths along with some supports and services to give them access to rigor, to actual academic concepts that go beyond clocks, colors, and coins. To actually give access, if we believe in 9th grade that students should be learning about earth science and that we think earthquakes and volcanoes and why tectonic plates are important, that everybody should be having access to those types of conversations and thinking. And that we map to that belief, knowing that there may be some supports in place or needing to be put in place in order for that to happen.
So why are we doing all that? We are presuming competence. We are presuming that regardless of whether someone is non-speaking or that they present themselves in any number of ways, that they are able and capable. And they're only limited, like I knew Shelby was, only limited by the language that they're provided to express, and that we interpret all of their behaviors I say, as communication. Right? Because that's what behaviors are. They're trying to tell us something. And so presuming competence, it has been and will continue to supercharge self-determination. Because if you believe someone can learn, then you believe someone can make their own choices about their lives. Right, Peter? And that they're responsible for their own destiny. And so what we're looking for is equity for students with disabilities. And one of the ways, and this is Shelby in her graduation cap, getting her certificate of completion. It was a great day, but it was bittersweet, I'll be honest, because every other person that went to all the same classes that Shelby did all got a high school diploma. And so to me, that wasn't okay. And to a lot of parents who were saying, why does my kid only get a certificate of completion? And even for some parents today who say, I'm going to opt out of the alternative pathway to a diploma because I want my child to, I don't want it to be so hard. I don't want them to struggle. And the reality is the dignity of risk in struggle is learning. And so over the past few years, we have created a new alternative pathway to a diploma, and you have some information there and in the Padlet if you're interested in knowing more about that. Because for that group of students, and these are students who take the ALT assessment, because there's not really another definition of what a student with significant cognitive disabilities is. That group of students are the students who are eligible for this. These are the students who have never had the opportunity to get a diploma. If you want the toolkit for the ALT pathway, there it is. If you and it is in your resources, the bit.ly, right? Yeah. So you can access it that way, so don't feel like you have to do this right now. But essentially in the Padlet also, for those of you who are working with the community and with school age folks, and we would say starting even in preschool, school age folks, we have a bunch of resources for families and educators and administrators about what this means and what the expectation is in the state. This is state law. So it's not like, do you want to get a diploma? Everyone can get a diploma. And in the words of an old dear friend who's now retired from the Department of Rehabilitation, Joe Xavier, he was one of the big proponents and one of the reasons that the state found a path to having individuals with extensive support needs be able to get a diploma. And his argument was that everyone needs a diploma, not only for their own dignity, but also because we don't ever want to have any barriers in place of why a person couldn't get a job. So we have a lot of supports around supported employment, competitive integrated employment. And while it's true that there are some situations where a diploma is not required, there are many situations where it is. And we just don't want to have that barrier. And so when we're looking at earning a diploma and eliminating those barriers, there are some myths around that. And that is that students with extensive support needs don't really need one. And like I said, 90% of employers actually prefer to hire youth with a diploma, because when you have a diploma, someone presumes that you're smart. You got a diploma, right? And then you will get more opportunities if so. Another myth. Students with extensive support needs don't need a diploma because they'll only be able to find work as volunteers and in supported employment. While they may decide in their self-determination, in their self-determined lives, that they would like to do volunteer work or work in supported employment, there are also many other choices. Like today, you can choose to go to a university if you want to, or many other things. And what we have found that if schools and districts are backward mapping from inclusive college and from a diploma, students that never had access to high school content are getting access to high school content. Okay? So, self-determination. This was an area that, as a mom, required our family to really start seeing Shelby as an adult. An ableist viewpoint, or as an admitted parent who had some ableist ideas, I had to check myself around why I was still having some of the behaviors and treating Shelby like she was when she was younger, right? Sometimes people who are non-speaking, who can't tell you all the complexities, you still see them as younger or not able. An example of that would be that in the last few years, Shelby has chosen to have support staff that are near her age. We have hired a number of different folks across ages, and I don't want to say that Shelby's ageist, but Shelby prefers to have people around 20 years old. And that's just what she prefers. And so we have had to let people go that Shelby has not preferred, not because they weren't great people, but because she didn't want a nurse to take her out in the community. She wanted a friend. She wanted someone who was fun. And so one day, as her aide Sienna had come back from somewhere, she said, "I was curious why Shelby always has to ride in the back seat." And I paused and I was like, because she always has ridden in the back seat. And it occurred to me that that was my problem. Shelby didn't always have to ride in the back seat. There are times when it's safer for her to be in the back seat if they're on long drives on the freeway or something like that. But Shelby going into the front seat brought Shelby great joy. And her assistant said, now when Shelby needs to have touch, she's not hurting her shoulder, trying to reach back, but she can hold Shelby's hand if that's what Shelby needs at that particular moment in time. And it's really changed how Shelby's perceived the car and many other things. Again, probably a duh to you, was not a duh to me until someone asked. And it was someone that didn't have that same mindset that I did, right? So as we're talking about self-determination and making college in particular a possibility, and now I say college with the idea that not everyone has to go to college, not everyone without disabilities goes to college, but the idea that you can go to college if that's what you choose to do is a pretty profound new idea. Last year in the state budget, the governor put in $2 million a year for the next 5 years for California to develop the Center for Inclusive College. That is specifically dedicated to students with intellectual and developmental disabilities who want to go to college. And it's set up to help universities, and they called out CSUs and UCs in particular, but I do know that Stanford and LMU are also looking to create programs for 4-year college experiences at CSUs and UCs, which include living in the dorms and in campus housing, which means attending all the courses that any other student would attend. We have a prime example of it. In fact, how many are aware of UC Davis Redwood Seed Scholars? Have you heard of this? They just graduated their first cohort, and they are really one of the premier inclusive college programs in the state, because they have fully embraced all aspects of inclusive living. And so the graduates from that program for this year all have employment and all are living in the Davis community, in housing with roommates and whatever they choose, because they feel a part of the Davis community. And I think that's what we're looking for, is how do you infiltrate a community? It's the perfect opportunity to do that with all the students who are in the Davis community. They have 100 mentors that also get to know the students, and it's really taken off. So Sacramento County Office of Education and LA County Office of Education are the co-leads for this new center. And so stay tuned for more on that. A new federal grant just came out, so we have a lot of universities in California applying for federal funds in the next 2 weeks to try to start their own program. Sac State is also trying to start a program. We'd love to show you a little clip on what inclusive college looks like.
Hi everyone, I'm a student here at Georgia Tech. We are asking students with intellectual disabilities around the country what's fun about going to college.
Is a chance to not be around your parents.
The best thing about being in college is the food. Being in a dorm, getting to meet new people.
You have a bed, you have a sink, you have a desk, you have a TV, and you have a refrigerator. You can also hang up posters anywhere.
Great mocha latte, the best mocha latte I ever have.
There are more than 420,000 school-age students with intellectual disability, but only 2% of them are likely to attend college after high school.
I wanted to come to KU because of the classes, and I wanted to take choir. And also I took American Sign Language.
The classes I'm taking right now are Business Law 1, Intermediate Algebra, and English Composition 2.
It's cool to meet new people. It's fun to chat with the guys and the managers and the coaches.
I want to be more independent and to join the sorority as my mom did.
I like to hang out with friends, watch sports, and I've joined the Southernmost Coral Restoration Club.
In high school, I have to be with a teacher all the time, so it was not like any dependent there. I was excited to have like a college life.
There are more than 300 inclusive post-secondary education programs around the country.
Having students with disabilities in classes has compelled our faculty to reflect on their practice. So it actually makes us better teachers, makes us better professors, makes us better scholars and researchers.
It's really got people to realize that we have to focus on universal access and doing things in universal design, everything that we do.
The great thing about including students with intellectual disabilities at KU is actually it makes the entire university a better university. It teaches students to appreciate difference, and it creates a more caring environment because students support each other.
This has united, I think, our campus, faculty, staff, and students. They have the opportunity to network and get mentors and other social skills and career development that their peers have had for many years. Now they have.
I want to go into real estate in the future.
My goal is to be a teacher at a preschool.
I would know that run a bed and breakfast.
Political science is one of 3 career goals I have in mind.
My credo is maybe work in the Kansas State Capitol.
I would like to have my own food truck because I want to have pizza, have some burgers, maybe have some tacos, nachos.
College has changed me because it's helped me grow up, like getting a job or living on your own.
It's great, and you have a lot of support when you get here.
If I can do it, you can do it, you know?
It's a time to be serious. It's a time to learn. I have the skills. I have the skills to live on my own one day.
Think higher. Think college for students with intellectual disability. Think access, employment, equity, options, diversity, independence, confidence, friendship. College is possible for students with intellectual disability. Take the first step at thinkhighered.net, a project of Think College.
The UC Davis Mind Institute is a co-lead with UC Davis around this college, this exceptional college program. These are the first graduates from this past year. They were received by the provost at UC Davis for their graduation, and they and their parents, as well as many other parents, have been, many of them waiting and searching for a really long time for programs to happen in California. And so one of the things that California is, I would say, a little behind many other states who've had college programs for a while, but positive things are going to happen in California based on, in large part, UC Davis being a place where people could visualize what is possible. So that's really cool. Yeah, snap for them. And so this is a little bit more about the inclusive college. If you're interested, you can take a look at, this is in your Padlet also. If you're curious about what other college programs there are in California, go to Think College right now. In another few months, California will have its own website where you can search by college and be able to apply and figure out how to apply those types of things. But we just got started this past year, so we don't have our website up yet. We really want to talk about adulthood and independent living. And while I'm sure there are some of you here that have deep expertise in this area, I think what we want to make sure that we hit is that when UC Davis Redwood C Scholars tried to figure out what students, people were asking, what do students need to know? What competencies do they need to have in order to be able to even go to college programs? And so they have some really well-defined core competencies. And if you want more information on those, some of this is here, but it's also on the UC Davis Redwood C Scholars site. And some of the work that we're doing in the state is we are backward mapping from those things. And so it's helping K-12 understand what are the things that need to be in place. And so these are the 9 core competencies that they've identified. Accepting responsibility for actions, kind to self and others, demonstrating resilience, able to follow directions, able to ask for help and clarification, demonstrates basic hygiene skills, able to manage medications, demonstrates knowledge of personal safety and time management. These are things that we learn, most students learn through school. But many times, our students with disabilities, again, don't have the dignity of risk to be able to have those opportunities, so they're not learning those skills. And so knowing this now helps us to make sure that, yes, all the functional things are attended to, right, which are some of these things, but also that level of independence. And sometimes you don't get both of those things together. So we're going to provide you some of these resources. These are on Bitly's you can look at later. But basically what's happened is looking at each age and stage, those competencies and skills that are required for college have really been backward mapped. So there's birth to age 3 and 18 to 22. So one of the reasons we included these, because as we were looking for doing both IEPs, IPPs, and our self-determination plans, it's really important that we look at all these areas because we haven't mapped to all these things necessarily in the past. So these are great resources. The other signature project in California supporting inclusive practices that are the ones who really started bringing together preschool teachers and transition teachers to have them start having conversations to kind of map in between. Together, they developed these. Sort of what are the pieces that need to happen at each stage. And Stephanie mentioned earlier that we have a new IEP, high quality IEPs. It's a project, a resource project in California. But the reason that it was developed is because California now has a new statewide template that is strength-based for IEPs. So as many of us who've been through IEPs before know, they're very deficit-based, right? They talk about all the things that a person or student cannot do. California's done a bunch of work in the last few years to completely shift that, to have it be strength-based, student-centered and driven, and have a lot more student voice in it. So if you look on the high quality IEPs resource we gave you, you'll see a whole new set of resources that have flipped. And with that, a lot of the questions are built in to answer a lot of these questions. So if you are doing work with districts, this is starting to roll out, and the first part of the rollout will be a choice of whether districts want to use this or not a mandate. And so please share the word.
We're
and the
really
joy.
hoping to encourage them to take it on.
So again, just wanted to make sure to provide you with a lot of resources so that if you're working with pretty much anyone in the school age system from birth to 22, these are really good resources. I actually looked at them for my daughter who's 27 because I hadn't looked at them before. I didn't think of all these things. I wish I would have thought of these things. So really for any age, these are the skills that are necessary in order to have more self-determination and more independent living, which I think is what we're after here.
And what we find in looking at those is that they map really nicely to those competencies that the inclusive college programs are finding are really critical for successful students. So it all ties together really with a nice little bow.
Yeah. So hindsight is 2020, right? That's Sienna in the middle, the one who asked me if Shelby could sit in the front seat. That's her principal from Aspire, who attended every IEP meeting and strongly advocated for her to have communication and to build on the communication she currently had. And the bottom is her friend Grace. For those of you who are in Sacramento, you probably know Grace, and you've probably seen Shelby out because those two are out everywhere, not necessarily together all the time, but they're out everywhere. And Grace is joining Shelby at one of her music therapy sessions. So one of the things that we're putting in place starting in the next few weeks is having music therapy out in the community. And so we're not doing things always alone. And so what should we have done differently? Should have had higher academic expectations. She could do a lot more than we gave her the opportunity to do. Should have been in relentless pursuit of that functional communication, because that is game changing. And then finally, underestimating the power of inclusivity, belonging, and not doing everything by yourself. And so as we are thinking about her future, building in so many more community supports and people who know her, and like at the Torch Club, when she's not there, she's missing, right? And that's very different than just coming there and people being like, oh, hey. People wonder what happened. And so that feels good to her. And now she knows that that's a place of belonging because she does feel welcome there. And also for the folks who support her feel welcome there. And that's also really important.
Well, and the people who love her.
And the people
are
who love her
grateful
too.
that she feels welcome there.
We are grateful.
As we transition into our final reflections, we want to give you an opportunity to think about what can you do with this information, what's next? And all of us in our different spaces can build places and spaces of belonging. We all have opportunities to do that, and all it takes is small steps. And so we want you to start with these 2 reflection questions. Wherever you are in your particular positionality in the world, you can choose which of these you want to reflect on. Identify one next step you'll take in moving forward, or something that you're going to think more about that we talked about today. Or as a consumer, what's one thing you wish you would have been able, or which would have been different, maybe some of the things we're talking about that are in place now, that you wish would have been different during your school experience.
The UC Davis Mind Institute was founded in 1998 with the promise to reduce and prevent the disabilities that can be associated with autism and other neurodevelopmental conditions. Every day, our clinicians and researchers make progress on that promise. Our groundbreaking research on autism, Fragile X syndrome, chromosome 22q11.2 deletion syndrome, ADHD, and other conditions associated with disability are helping affected individuals achieve their fullest potential. Please visit our website or our social media platforms to find out more about current studies, upcoming events, and how you can help make a difference.